an unidentified serial killer who operated in Northern California in the late 1960s under the pseudonym the Zodiac Killer has become one of the most famous unsolved murder cases in American history. The killer targeted young couples and a lone male cab driver, murdering 5 known victims in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. His attacks took place in rural, urban and suburban settings, and 2 of his victims survived. The Zodiac claimed to have murdered 37 victims, and while he has been linked to several other cold cases, some outside California, his identity remains unknown. The killer sent a series of taunting letters and cards to regional newspapers, threatening killing sprees and bombings if they were not printed. Some of the letters included cryptograms, in which the killer claimed that he was collecting his victims as slaves for the afterlife. 2 of the 4 ciphers he produced remain unsolved, and one was cracked only in 2020. Despite the case's unusual nature, and the many theories that have been suggested about the killer's identity, the only suspect authorities ever publicly named was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender who died in 1992. Although the Zodiac stopped communicating in 1974, the case has continued to draw international interest. The San Francisco Police Department marked the case inactive in April 2004, but reopened it at some point prior to March 2007. The case remains open in the city of Vallejo, as well as in Napa and Solano counties, and the California Department of Justice has maintained an open case file on the Zodiac murders since 1969. Despite the Zodiac Killer claiming responsibility for 37 murders in his letters to newspapers, investigators have confirmed 7 assault victims, 5 of whom were killed, while the other 2 survived. There are David Arthur Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, shot and killed on December 20, 1968, on Lake Herman Road, in Benicia. Michael Reno Maju, 19, and Darlene Elizabeth Farron, 22, shot on July 4, 1969, in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. Maju survived the attack, while Farron was pronounced dead upon arrival at Kaiser Foundation Hospital. Brian Calvin Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Ann Shepard, 22, stabbed on September 27, 1969. At Lake Berryessa in Napa County. Hartnell survived the attack, but Shepard succumbed to her injuries 2 days later, on September 29. Paul Lee Stein, 29, shot and killed on October 11, 1969, in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. On December 20, 1968, high school students Betty Lou Jensen and David Arthur Faraday were shot and killed on Lake Herman Road, inside the city limits of Benicia. The couple had planned to attend a Christmas concert at Hogan High School and were on their first date. They stopped at a local restaurant before heading to the popular Lover's Lane area on Lake Herman Road. Faraday parked his mother's car in a gravel turnout at around 10:15 p.m. At approximately 11 p.m., their bodies were found by a nearby resident named Stella Borjas. Despite an investigation by the Solano County Sheriff's Department, no leads developed. In his 1976 account, Robert Graysmith speculated that the killer may have parked another car beside the couple's car, possibly ordering them out of it before shooting Faraday in the head as he was halfway out of the car. Jensen was shot 5 times in the back as she fled, and her body was found 28 feet away from the car. The killer then drove off, and no one was ever identified or charged for the murders. These killings are widely attributed to the Zodiac Killer. Darlene Farron and Michael Maju arrived at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo and parked their car just before midnight on July 4, 1969. This park was located 4 miles away from the Lake Herman Road murder site. As they sat in Farron's car, a second vehicle pulled into the lot and parked beside them but quickly left. The same car returned about 10 minutes later and parked behind them. The driver got out of the car and approached the passenger side of Farron's vehicle while carrying a 9mm Luger and a flashlight. The killer shone the flashlight into the eyes of both victims before firing 5 shots at them. Both were hit, and some bullets passed through Maju and hit Farron. The perpetrator walked away from the car but then returned to shoot each victim twice more before driving off. At 12:40 a.m. on July 5, 1969, a man phoned the Vallejo Police Department to report that he was responsible for the attack. The caller also claimed to have committed the murders of Jensen and Faraday 6.5 months earlier. Police traced the call to a phone booth at a gas station located about 3/10 of a mile away from Farron's home and a few blocks from the Vallejo Police Department. Farron died in the hospital, but Maju survived despite being shot in the face, neck, and chest. Maju described the attacker as a white male with short, light brown curly hair who was 26 to 30 years old, weighed between 195 and 200 pounds, 88 to 91 kilograms, and was 5 feet 8 inches, 1.73 meters, tall or possibly even taller. First letters from the Zodiac. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is when I die I will be reborn in paradise and all the I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or atop my collection of slaves for my afterlife. In August 1969, the solution to Zodiac's 408-symbol cipher was deciphered, with accurate transliterations of spelling and grammatical errors from the original text. However, the final 18-letter significance remains unknown. On August 1, 1969, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner received 3 letters allegedly composed by the Zodiac Killer. The letters were almost identical and were later identified by a psychiatrist as being written by an individual who was brooding and isolated. In these letters, the Zodiac Killer took responsibility for the shootings at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs and provided 1/3 of a 408-symbol cryptogram that he claimed would reveal his identity. The killer threatened to continue killing until the letters were printed on each paper's front page. The Chronicle published its third of the cryptogram on page 4 the next day. However, Vallejo Police Chief Jackie Stilts expressed doubt about the authenticity of the letter and urged the writer to provide more details to prove their identity. Despite the threat, the promised murders did not occur, and all 3 parts of the cryptogram were eventually published. August 7, 1969 marked the first instance of the Zodiac Killer using this moniker in correspondence, when he wrote a letter to the San Francisco Examiner beginning with the salutation, "Dear Editor, this is the Zodiac speaking." The letter was in response to Vallejo Police Chief Jackie Stilts's request for additional details to prove the killer's involvement in the murders of Faraday, Jensen, and Farron. The Zodiac included previously undisclosed information about the murders and claimed that the police would apprehend him once they cracked his code. According to author Siren Roost Korsgaard, the episode paragraph in the letter referred to the Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode Museum Piece, which featured a gun with an attached light, an element that the Zodiac incorporated into his own crimes. The episode also contained the phrase "the most dangerous game," which the Zodiac both referenced and emulated in his actions. The 408-symbol cryptogram was deciphered by Donald and Betty Hardin of Salinas, California on August 8, 1969. The message was misspelled and contained a reference to the most dangerous game. The author also mentioned collecting slaves for his afterlife but did not provide a name. The killer stated that he would not reveal his identity as it would impede his ability to collect slaves. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, both students at Pacific Union College, were enjoying a picnic on a small island connected to Twin Oak Ridge by a sandspit at Lake Berryessa on September 27, 1969. At around 6:30 p.m., a white man, over 5 feet 11 inches, 1.80 meters, tall and weighing more than 170 pounds, 77 kilograms, wearing a black hood with clip-on sunglasses over the eye holes and a bib-like device on his chest that had a white cross-circle symbol on it, approached them with a gun. The hooded man claimed to be an escaped convict from a jail with a 2-word name, either in Colorado or Montana, where he had killed a guard and stolen a car. He demanded their car and money to travel to Mexico because the stolen vehicle was too hot. The killer brought pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline and forced Shepard to tie up Hartnell before he tied her up. After checking and tightening Hartnell's bonds, the killer drew a knife and repeatedly stabbed both of them. Hartnell was initially under the impression that the attack was a bizarre robbery. However, the killer hiked 500 yards, 460 meters, up to Knoxville Road, drew the cross-circle symbol on Hartnell's car door with a black felt-tip pen, and wrote the following words beneath it: Vallejo, December 20, 1968, July 4, 1969, Sep 2769 6:30 by knife. Hartnell sustained 6 wounds, while Shepard suffered 10 in the process. At 7:40 p.m., the perpetrator called the Napa County Sheriff's Office from a payphone to confess to the crime. Initially, the caller told the operator that he wanted to report a murder, no, a double murder, before admitting to the crime. A few minutes later, KVON radio reporter Pat Stanley found the phone still off the hook at the Napa Car Wash on Main Street in Napa, a few blocks from the sheriff's office and 27 miles, 43 kilometers, from the crime scene. Although detectives lifted a still wet palm print from the telephone, they were unable to match it to any suspect. A man and his son fishing in a nearby cove heard the victim's screams for help and discovered the couple, immediately contacting park rangers for assistance. Napa County Sheriff's deputies Dave Collins and Rayland were the first law enforcement officials to arrive at the scene. Shepard was still conscious when Collins arrived and provided a detailed description of the attacker. Hartnell and Shepard were transported to Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa by ambulance. Although Shepard lapsed into a coma during transport and never regained consciousness, Hartnell survived the attack and was able to recount the ordeal to the press. Detective Ken Arlo, who was assigned to the case from the beginning, continued to work on solving the crime until his retirement from the department in 1987. On October 11, 1969, a white male passenger hailed a cab driven by Paul Stine at the intersection of Mason and Geary Streets in San Francisco, requesting to be taken to Washington and Maple Streets in Presidio Heights. Instead of stopping at Maple, Stine drove one block further to Cherry Street for unknown reasons. The passenger shot Stine in the head with a 9mm handgun, stole his wallet and car keys, and tore off a piece of his blood-stained shirt. 3 teenagers across the street witnessed the crime at 9:55 p.m. and immediately called the police. They saw the killer wiping down the cab before walking away towards the Presidio, 1 block north. Responding to the call, patrol officers Don Falk and Eric Zelms saw a white man walking along Jackson Street 2 blocks from the crime scene, stepping onto a stairway leading up to a house's front yard on the north side of the street. The encounter lasted 5 to 10 seconds, and the officers estimated the pedestrian to be 35 to 45 years old, 5 feet 10 inches tall, with a crew cut. This description differed slightly from the teenager's description of a man aged 25 to 30, 5 feet 8 to 5 feet 9 inches tall, and with a crew cut. Despite the sighting, the officers drove past the man without stopping because the police radio dispatcher had described the suspect as black. A search followed, but no suspects were found. This murder was officially the last one attributed to the Zodiac Killer. Initially, the Stine murder was believed to be a robbery gone wrong. However, on October 13, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter from Zodiac claiming responsibility for the killing and containing a torn piece of Stine's bloody shirt as proof. The 3 teenage witnesses collaborated with a police artist to create a composite sketch of the killer, resulting in a second sketch a few days later. Detectives Bill Armstrong and Dave Toschi were assigned to the case, and the San Francisco Police Department investigated roughly 2,500 suspects over several years. 1969 mailings. I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show which bring up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because Sid will send me to paradal solve the sewer because he now have enough slaves to work for me where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I've now that my new life will be an easy one and paradise death. The solution to Zodiac's 340 symbol cipher, solved in December 2020. Including faithful transliterations of spelling and grammar errors in the original. Another letter from the Zodiac was received by the Chronicle on October 14, 1969, containing a swatch of Paul Stine's shirt tail as evidence of his guilt in the murder. The letter also contained a threat to shoot schoolchildren as they exited a bus. The Zodiac demanded that one of 2 prominent lawyers, F. Lee Bailey or Melvin Belly, appear on a talk show. Belly agreed to appear on the show, during which the Zodiac called several times but did not reveal his true identity. The call was later traced to a patient in a mental institution who was not the Zodiac. On November 8, 1969, the Zodiac sent a card containing a cryptogram with 340 characters, which remained unsolved for over 51 years. In December 2020, an international team of private citizens deciphered the message, in which the Zodiac denied being Sam and claimed that he was not afraid of the gas chamber. The FBI verified the discovery but stated that it provided no further clues to the identity of the Zodiac.
The Zodiac sent a 7-page letter to the Chronicle on November 9, 1969, claiming that 2 police officers had stopped and spoken to him 3 minutes after he killed Stine. On November 12, excerpts from the letter were published in the Chronicle, along with the Zodiac's claim. Officer Don Falk wrote a memo the same day, describing what happened on the night of Stine's murder. 1 year after the killings of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, on December 20, 1969, the Zodiac sent a letter to Belly that contained another swatch of Stine's shirt. In the letter, the Zodiac asked for Belly's help. There is no agreement on the extent of the Zodiac's criminal activities, including the number of victims. Robert Graysmith's 1986 nonfiction book, Zodiac, presented a list of 49 victims attributed to the Zodiac, including some cases that have been either fully resolved or have been discredited by investigators as having no connection to the Zodiac. Some other authors at the time of the murders suggested that the Zodiac may have been responsible for other notorious killings and assaults, but none of these have been definitively linked to the Zodiac. Cab driver Ray Davis may have been a victim of the Zodiac Killer according to local historian Christy Hawthorne. In April 1962, an individual, believed to be the perpetrator, had called the Oceanside Police Department to make a threatening statement a day before the murder. The police received another call from the same individual after the murder, providing details of the crime and threatening to kill a bus driver next. The police are investigating possible connections between this murder and the Zodiac Killer, following Hawthorne's research. Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office investigator Bill Baker speculated that the 1963 murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards could be linked to the Zodiac Killer. The couple was shot and killed on a beach near Lompoc, and their bodies were placed in a small shack which was then unsuccessfully set on fire. Cherie Jo Bates, an 18-year-old student, was stabbed to death and nearly decapitated on October 30, 1966, at Riverside City College. Her connection to the Zodiac only emerged 4 years later when San Francisco Chronicle reporter Paul Avery received a tip regarding similarities between her murder and the Zodiac killings. Kathleen Johns, 22, was allegedly abducted on March 22, 1970, on Highway 132 near I-580, west of Modesto. She escaped from the car of a man who drove her and her infant daughter around the area for about 1.5 hours. Donna Ann Lass, 25, was last seen on September 6, 1970, in State Line, Nevada. A postcard bearing an advertisement for Forest Pines condominiums was received at the Chronicle on March 22, 1971. However, there is no evidence to connect Lass's disappearance with the Zodiac Killer. Nearly identical typewritten letters titled The Confession were mailed to the Riverside Police and the Riverside Press Enterprise on November 29, 1966. The author claimed responsibility for the murder of Cherie Jo Bates and provided details of the crime that were not released to the public. The letter also included a warning that Bates is not the first and she will not be the last. A poem titled Sick of Living/Unwilling to Die was discovered in December 1966, carved into a desk at the Riverside City College Library. The poem's language and handwriting were similar to that of the Zodiac's letters and were signed with the initials R.H. During the 1970 investigation, California's top questioned documents examiner, Sherwood Morrill, expressed his opinion that the poem was written by the Zodiac. On April 30, 1967, nearly identical letters were received by Joseph Bates, the Press Enterprise, and the Riverside Police, stating Bates had to die, there will be more. The Press Enterprise and police copies had a small scribble resembling the letter Z at the bottom, while Joseph Bates' copy did not have a signature. In August 2021, the Riverside Police Department's Homicide Cold Case Unit announced that the author of the handwritten letters anonymously contacted investigators in 2016 and was identified via DNA analysis in 2020. The author admitted that the correspondence was a distasteful hoax and apologized, explaining that he had been a troubled teenager and wrote the letters as a means of seeking attention. Investigators confirmed that the author was not the Zodiac. The Zodiac sent a letter to the Los Angeles Times on March 13, 1971, crediting the police for discovering his Riverside activity. This was 5 months after Paul Avery's article linking the Zodiac to the Riverside murder. The Zodiac claimed that the police were only finding the easy cases and that there were many more to be found. However, there is still uncertainty about the connection between Cherie Jo Bates, Riverside, and the Zodiac. While Paul Avery and the Riverside Police Department maintain that the Zodiac did not commit the Bates homicide, they do acknowledge that some of the Bates letters may have been falsely claimed by the Zodiac. A postcard believed to be from the Zodiac, addressed to Paul Everly, appeared in the Chronicle on March 22, 1971, claiming responsibility for the disappearance of Donna Lass on September 6, 1970. The postcard was made from a collage of advertisements and magazine lettering, featuring an image from an advertisement for Forest Pines condominiums and the text Sierra Club, sought victim 12, peek through the pines, pass Lake Tahoe areas, and around in the snow. The Zodiac symbol, a cross circle, was present in both the usual return address and the lower right section of the front face of the postcard. Donna Lass was a nurse at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino, and her last patient was treated at 1:40 a.m. on September 6, 1970. That same day, Lass's employer and landlord received phone calls from an unknown male claiming falsely that Lass had left town due to a family emergency. Lass was never found, but a potential grave site was discovered near the Claire Tapon Lodge in Norton, California, on Sierra Club property. Despite these findings, no definitive evidence has emerged connecting the Lass disappearance to the Zodiac Killer. Kathleen Johns was driving from San Bernardino to Petaluma to visit her mother on the night of March 22, 1970. She was 7 months pregnant and accompanied by her 10-month-old daughter. While driving on Highway 132 near Modesto, a car behind her started honking and flashing its headlights. Johns pulled over, and the man in the car told her that her right rear wheel was wobbling and offered to tighten the lug nuts. After he finished, he drove off, but the wheel almost immediately came off. He returned and offered to drive her to the nearest gas station for help, and she and her daughter got into his car. However, during the ride, he did not stop at any of the service stations they passed, and he drove around the back roads near Tracy for about 90 minutes without explanation. When Johns asked why he was not stopping, he would avoid the question. Finally, he stopped at an intersection, and Johns and her daughter jumped out and hid in a field. The driver searched for them with a flashlight, but eventually gave up and drove off. Johns hitched a ride to the police station in Patterson. When Johns gave her statement to the sergeant on duty, she recognized the police composite sketch of Paul Stine's killer and identified him as the man who had abducted her and her child. The sergeant had Johns wait in the dark at Mills restaurant because he feared that the man might return to kill them all. Johns' car was later found gutted and torched. Although most accounts say that the man threatened to kill Johns and her daughter while driving them around, at least one police report disputes this. John's account to Paul Avery of the Chronicle also indicates that the abductor left his car and searched for her in the dark with a flashlight, but in one report she made to the police, she stated that he did not leave the vehicle. Throughout the remainder of 1970, the Zodiac Killer continued to communicate with authorities via letters and greeting cards sent to the press. One letter, postmarked on April 20, 1970, began with the sentence "My name is blank line," followed by a 13-character cipher that has yet to be solved. The Zodiac Killer denied responsibility for the recent bombing of a police station in San Francisco, which occurred on February 18, 1970, and resulted in the death of SGT. Brian McDonnell 2 days later, but wrote that there is more glory to killing a cop than a sick because a cop can shoot back. He also included a diagram of a bomb that he claimed he would use to blow up a school bus, with the statement Zodiac Killer symbol .svg equals 10. SFPD equals 0 written at the bottom of the diagram. A greeting card sent by the Zodiac postmarked April 28, 1970, was received by the Chronicle. It had the message "I hope you enjoy yourselves when I have my blast," followed by the Zodiac's signature. On the reverse side of the card, the Zodiac threatened to detonate the bus bomb unless the newspaper published the full details he had written, and he also requested to see people wearing some nice Zodiac buttons. In a letter postmarked June 26, 1970, the Zodiac expressed his disappointment that he did not see people wearing Zodiac buttons and claimed, "I shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38. This statement might refer to the murder of SGT. Richard Radedick, who was killed on June 19, 1970, while writing a parking ticket in his squad car. A person unrelated to the traffic violation shot Radedick in the head with a .38 caliber pistol through the closed driver's side window, and he died 15 hours later. The SFPD denies the Zodiac's involvement, and the murder remains unsolved. In April 1970, Zodiac sent a greeting card to the Chronicle with a message that read, "I hope you enjoy yourselves when I have my blast." On the back, he threatened to use a bus bomb unless the paper published his full details and people started wearing nice Zodiac buttons. In June, he wrote a letter expressing disappointment that people were not wearing Zodiac buttons and claimed responsibility for the murder of SGT. Richard Radedick. He included a Phillips 66 roadmap of the San Francisco Bay Area, on which he drew a cross circle with a 0, 3, 6, and 9. The letter also had a cipher that he claimed would lead to the location of a bomb he had buried. In a later letter, he claimed credit for Kathleen Johns's abduction and included lyrics about making a little list of ways to torture his slaves. In October, the Chronicle received a small card with the Zodiac Killer symbol .svg and a small cross drawn with blood. The message was formed by pasting words and letters from an edition of the Chronicle, and 13 holes were punched across the card. Inspectors believed it was sent by the Zodiac. On October 27, 1970, the Zodiac case reporter for the Chronicle, Paul Avery, received a Halloween card with a handwritten note "Peekaboo, you are doomed," signed with a letter Z and the Zodiac's cross circle symbol. The threat was taken seriously and became the subject of a front-page story in the Chronicle. Shortly after, Avery received an anonymous letter drawing similarities between the Zodiac's activities and the unsolved murder of Cherie Jo Bates, which had occurred 4 years earlier at the City College in Riverside, over 400 miles, 640 kilometers, away from San Francisco. Avery reported his findings in the Chronicle on November 16, 1970. Following the Lake Tahoe card, there was a period of silence from the Zodiac for approximately 3 years. On January 29, 1974, the Chronicle received a letter from the Zodiac, which was postmarked with that date. In the letter, the killer praised The Exorcist as the best satirical comedy he had ever seen. Along with a snippet of verse from The Mikado, the letter contained an unexplained symbol at the bottom that has stumped researchers to this day. The Zodiac ended the letter with a new score of Me equals 37, SFPD equals 0. Several communications sent to members of the news media shared similarities with previous Zodiac writings. On February 14, 1974, the Chronicle received a letter claiming that the initials for the Symbionese Liberation Army spelled out an Old Norse word meaning kill. However, the authenticity of the handwriting as the Zodiac's was not verified. A letter postmarked May 8, 1974, sent to the Chronicle, complained about the movie Badlands, claiming it was murder glorification and requested that the paper remove its advertisements. The letter was signed only as a citizen and had similar handwriting, tone, and surface irony to earlier Zodiac communications. On July 8, 1974, the Chronicle received an anonymous letter, signed The Red Phantom, Red with Rage, which criticized the publication of anti-feminist columnist Marco Spinelli. It is unclear if the Zodiac authored this letter. On April 24, 1978, a letter was initially considered authentic, but experts declared it a hoax less than 3 months later. Dave Toschi, the SFPD homicide detective who had worked on the case since the Stein murder, was suspected of forging the letter. Author Armistead Maupin believed that the letter was similar to fan mail he received in 1976 that praised Toschi's work on the investigation and believed that both letters were written by Toschi. Although Toschi admitted to writing the fan mail, he denied forging the Zodiac letter and was eventually cleared of any charges. The authenticity of this letter remains unverified. In 2007, Daniel King, an editorial assistant, discovered an American Greetings Christmas card in the Chronicle's photo files that had been sent in 1990 from Eureka. The card was handed over to the Vallejo police after it was found that it contained a photocopy of 2 U.S. postal keys on a magnet keychain. Although the handwriting on the envelope resembled Zodiac's print, forensic document examiner Lloyd Cunningham declared it inauthentic. However, there is disagreement among Zodiac experts regarding Cunningham's analysis. The envelope lacked a return address and the cross-circle signature was missing. The card itself had no markings. The Chronicle turned over all the material to the Vallejo Police Department for further analysis. The SFPD initially closed the Zodiac case in April 2004 due to caseload pressure and resource demands, but later reopened it before March 2007. The case is still open in Napa County and the city of Riverside. In May 2018, the Vallejo Police Department announced plans to collect the Zodiac Killer's DNA from the back of stamps he used in his correspondence. A private laboratory was set to analyze the DNA against GE'd match, with hopes of catching the killer, similar to how the Golden State Killer was identified. A Vallejo police detective stated that results were expected within several weeks, but as of October 2022, no updates on the results have been reported. Arthur Lee Allen, who died in 1992, was identified as a potential suspect in Robert Graysmith's book Zodiac, based on circumstantial evidence. Allen was interviewed by police from the early days of the Zodiac investigations and was subject to several search warrants over a 20-year period. In 2007, Graysmith claimed that several police detectives described Allen as the most likely suspect. However, in 2010, Dave Toschi revealed that all the evidence against Allen ultimately turned out to be negative. Even though Toschi's daughter stated in 2018 that her father had always thought Allen was the killer, they did not have the evidence to prove it. Mark Ruffalo, who played Toschi in the 2007 film Zodiac, noted that the detectives had to keep their personal beliefs aside and investigate every lead. On October 6, 1969, Detective John Lynch of the Vallejo Police Department interviewed Allen, who had been reported in the vicinity of the Lake Berryessa attack against Hartnell and Shepard on September 27, 1969. Allen claimed that he was scuba diving at Salt Point on the day of the attacks. Allen's friend Donald Cheney reported to police in Manhattan Beach, California, in 1971 that Allen had spoken of his desire to kill people, used the name Zodiac, and attached a flashlight to a firearm for visibility at night. Cheney claimed that this conversation occurred no later than January 1, 1969. According to Jack Malanax of the Vallejo Police Department, Arthur Lee Allen had been fired from his job as an elementary school teacher in March 1968 following allegations of sexual misconduct with students, and had received a dishonorable discharge from the U.S. Navy in 1958. Despite being generally well regarded by those who knew him, Allen was described as having a fixation on young children and being angry at women. In September 1972, San Francisco police obtained a search warrant for Allen's residence. He was arrested in 1974 for sexually assaulting a 12-year-old boy, pleaded guilty, and served 2 years in prison. Vallejo police served another search warrant at Allen's residence in February 1991, and 2 days after his death in 1992, they served another warrant and seized property from his home. In July 1992, victim Mike Maggio identified Allen as the man who shot him in 1969 from a photo lineup. However, police officer Donald Fouke, who is believed to have seen the Zodiac fleeing from the Stein killing, stated in the 2007 documentary his name was Arthur Lee Allen, that Allen was about 100 pounds heavier than the man he saw and had a face that was too round. Additionally, Nancy Slover, who received the call from the Zodiac after the Maggio/Farron shooting, said that Allen did not sound like the man on the phone. There were other pieces of circumstantial evidence that pointed to Allen as a potential suspect. For instance, a letter sent by the killer of Bates to the Riverside Police Department was typed on a Royal typewriter with an Elite type, the same brand that was found during a search of Allen's residence in February 1991. Additionally, Allen owned and wore a Zodiac brand wristwatch, lived in Vallejo, and worked close to where one of the Zodiac victims lived and where one of the killings occurred. In 2002, the SFPD obtained a partial DNA profile from the saliva on stamps and envelopes of Zodiac's letters. This DNA was compared to that of Arthur Lee Allen and his former close friend Don Chaney, who was the first to suggest Allen might be the Zodiac Killer. However, neither test indicated a match, and both Allen and Chaney were excluded as the contributors of the DNA. Retired police handwriting expert Lloyd Cunningham, who worked on the Zodiac case for decades, stated that he had been given boxes of Allen's writing, but none of it matched the Zodiac's writing. Similarly, DNA extracted from the Zodiac's letters did not match Arthur Lee Allen's DNA. In October 2021, the Case Breakers, a group of more than 40 cold case investigators consisting of former law enforcement investigators, military intelligence officers, and journalists, claimed to have identified the Zodiac Killer as Gary Francis Post, who passed away in 2018 at the age of 80. The group stated that they had uncovered forensic evidence and photographs from Post's darkroom, and pointed out that scars on Post's forehead matched those described on the killer. They also claimed that removing the letters of Post's name from one of Zodiac's cryptograms revealed an alternate message. However, local law enforcement expressed skepticism regarding the team's findings, and the FBI stated that the case remained open with no new information to report. Riverside Police Officer Ryan Railsback commented that the Case Breakers' claims relied mainly on circumstantial evidence. While Tom Voigt, an investigator of the Zodiac Killer, dismissed the claims as bullshit. Voigt pointed out that no witnesses in the case had described the Zodiac Killer as having scars on his forehead. Italian journalist Francesco Amicon's independent inquiry in 2018 implicated Joseph, also known as Giuseppe Bevilacqua, former superintendent of the Florence American Cemetery and Memorial, as a suspect in the Zodiac and Monster of Florence murder cases. Bevilacqua testified at the trial of Monster of Florence prime suspect Pietro Pacciani in 1994. Amicon claimed that Bevilacqua confessed to being the killer in both cases on September 11, 2017. However, investigations by Italian authorities into Bevilacqua were suspended in 2021. In 2009, an episode of the History Channel television series Mystery Quest examined Richard Gaykowski, a newspaper editor for Good Times, a counterculture newspaper in San Francisco, as a potential suspect. Gaykowski's appearance was similar to the composite sketch, and Nancy Slover, the Vallejo police dispatcher who was contacted by the Zodiac shortly after the Blue Rock Springs attack, identified a recording of Gaykowski's voice as being the same as the Zodiac's. In his book The Black Dahlia Avenger, retired police detective Steve Hodel puts forward the argument that his father, George Hodel, was the infamous 1947 Black Dahlia killer who murdered Elizabeth Short. Hodel's claims led to the release of previously withheld files and wire recordings by the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office that showed his father was indeed a prime suspect in the murder. District Attorney Steve Kay wrote a letter, which was published in the revised edition, stating that if George Hodel were still alive, he would be prosecuted for the crime. In a subsequent book, Hodel presented a circumstantial case that his father was also the Zodiac Killer, citing a police sketch, the similarity between the style of the Zodiac letters and the Black Dahlia Avenger letters, and questioned document examination. Lawrence K., later known as Lawrence Kane, was identified by Kathleen Johns, a woman who claimed to have been abducted by the Zodiac Killer, in a photo lineup. Patrol Officer Don Fouke, who may have seen the Zodiac Killer following the murder of Paul Stein, reported that Kane resembled the man he and Eric Zelms encountered. Kane also worked at the same Nevada hotel as a possible Zodiac victim, Donna Lass. However, Kane's history of brain injuries and diagnosis of impulse control disorder may have contributed to his criminal record for voyeurism and prowling. In 2021, Fakel Zyrwi claimed to have solved the Z13 cipher, which allegedly revealed the message "My name is Kayer," possibly indicating a typo for K. However, others have disputed Zyrwi's ability to solve the cipher. Meanwhile, police informants have accused Richard Marshall of being the Zodiac Killer, although Detective Ken Narlow has stated that he does not consider Marshall to be a strong suspect. Despite his living in close proximity to the scenes of the Bates and Stein murders and his interest in silent films. In 2001, Louis Joseph Myers allegedly confessed to a friend that he was the Zodiac Killer before his death from cirrhosis of the liver the following year. Myers asked his friend, Randy Kenny, to go to the police with his confession. Myers had potential connections to the Zodiac case, having attended the same high schools as victims David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen and allegedly worked at the same restaurant as victim Darlene Ferrin. During the period of 1971 to 1973, when no Zodiac letters were received, Myers was stationed overseas with the military. Kenny claims that Myers confessed to targeting couples because of a bad breakup with a girlfriend. While authorities are skeptical, they consider the story credible enough to investigate if Kenny can provide credible evidence. Robert Yvonne Nichols, also known as Joseph Newton Chandler III, was an unidentified identity thief who committed suicide in Ohio in 2002. After his death, investigators found that he had stolen the identity of an 8-year-old boy who was killed in a car crash in Texas in 1945. The lengths that Nichols went to conceal his identity led to speculation that he was a violent fugitive. In 2018, the U.S. Marshals Service identified him and announced his identification at a press conference in Cleveland. Some individuals on the internet suggested that Nichols may have been the Zodiac Killer, as he resembled police sketches of the Zodiac and had lived in California, where the Zodiac operated. Ross Sullivan, a library assistant at Riverside City College, became a person of interest in the Zodiac Killer case due to a possible link to the murder of Cherie Jo Bates in Riverside. Co-workers reported that Sullivan went missing for several days after the murder, and he resembled sketches of the Zodiac. Furthermore, the military-style boots Sullivan wore had footprints similar to those found at the Lake Berryessa crime scene. Sullivan suffered from bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and was hospitalized multiple times. In 2007, Dennis Kaufman claimed that his stepfather Jack Terrence was the Zodiac Killer and turned over several items to the FBI, including a hood similar to the one worn by the Zodiac. However, DNA analysis conducted by the FBI on the items in 2010 was inconclusive. Lyndon Lafferty, a former California Highway Patrol officer, claimed that the Zodiac Killer was a 91-year-old Solano County man he called George Russell Tucker. With a group of retired law enforcement officers known as the Mandamus Seven, Lafferty discovered Tucker and alleged a cover-up for why he was not pursued. However, Tucker died in 2012 and was not considered a suspect by police, so he was not named. In 2014, Gary Stewart published a book titled The Most Dangerous Animal of All, in which he claimed that his biological father, Earl Van Best Jr., was the Zodiac Killer. The book was adapted into a documentary series by FX Network in 2020. Melvin Belli, in his 1976 autobiography My Life on Trial, recounted an encounter he engineered between himself, undercover police officers, and a law student from Riverside who had allegedly threatened a female classmate by claiming to be the Zodiac. Belli met the young man face to face and decided that he was not the Zodiac. Despite subsequent inconclusive handwriting analyses, authorities ruled this person out as a suspect. In 2009, disbarred lawyer Robert Tarbox claimed that in the early 1970s, a merchant mariner confessed to him that he was the Zodiac Killer. The man, whose name Tarbox did not reveal based on confidentiality, described his crimes briefly but convincingly. He claimed to be trying to stop himself from his opportunistic murder spree but never returned to see Tarbox again. Tarbox took out a full-page ad in the Vallejo Times-Herald, claiming the story would clear the name of Arthur Lee Allen as a suspect. Robert Graysmith, a Zodiac author, found the story entirely plausible. In 2010, a picture emerged of known Zodiac victim Darlene Ferrin and an unknown man who closely resembled the composite sketch of the Zodiac Killer based on eyewitness descriptions. Police believe the photo was taken in San Francisco in either 1966 or 1967, according to America's Most Wanted, February 19, 2011. Sandy Betts, an amateur Zodiac researcher, alleges that she was repeatedly harassed and attacked by the individuals responsible for the Zodiac attacks. She claims that 3 men were the main perpetrators, with at least one of them still living in the San Francisco Bay Area. According to Betts, the primary killer went by the name Tony and worked in the construction industry. She estimates that there were several dozen fatal Zodiac attacks overall. In her version of events, certain aspects of the Zodiac crimes are theatrical in nature. Tom Voigt, a researcher on the Zodiac case, reported that fingerprint comparison in February 1989 cleared 1970s serial killer Ted Bundy as a person of interest in the case. Former cold case detective John A. Cameron linked serial killer Edward Edwards, who committed 5 murders between 1977 and 1996, to the Zodiac murders and several other unsolved cases, including the West Memphis 3, the Atlanta child murders, the 2001 Amerithrax attacks, the killing of Chandra Levy, and the murder of Kent Heitholt. However, Cameron's theories were met with almost universal disdain, especially from law enforcement. Ted Kaczynski, also known as the Unabomber, was investigated for possible connections to the Zodiac Killer in 1996 but was ruled out by both the FBI and SFPD based on fingerprint and handwriting comparison and his absence from California on certain dates of known Zodiac activity. The California Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation eliminated all male members of the Manson family as Zodiac suspects in a 1970 report following the capture of Charles Manson and his cult. The story of the Zodiac Killer is one that continues to captivate and intrigue people around the world. Despite numerous investigations and countless suspects over the years, the identity of the notorious killer remains a mystery. The unsolved nature of the case has led to a plethora of theories and speculation, as well as inspired books, movies, and TV shows. While the Zodiac Killer's reign of terror may have ended decades ago, his legacy lives on, and his crimes continue to be a subject of fascination and investigation. As time passes, it is possible that new evidence or advancements in forensic technology may finally uncover the truth behind one of the most infamous serial killers in history.